Hello, everybody, and welcome to the program. Today, I have with me Mr. Ray McGovern himself. I'm very pleased to see you. Welcome to the show. Yeah,
Thank you very much.
you've been involved in both governments and CIA, and you have an extensive CV, curriculum vitae, as we say. Can you introduce yourself a little bit short to the Swedish viewers who don't know who you are necessarily? Your background, short.
Of course. I'm an old guy. I was born before World War II, just 1 week before, but my youth was informed by what I still call the war. Okay.
Yeah,
I decided to major in concentrate in my studies in Russian, where there was a great Russian institute at Fordham University in New York. And so when President John Kennedy, in his inaugural address, said, think about what you can do for your country rather than what your country can do for you,
yeah,
I said, that sounds right for me. The Russians are a big menace, a big danger. I speak Russian. I can teach Russian. I can use Russian to help our government make sure that the Russians don't take over the world. Okay. So
yeah,
I was a cold warrior, supreme.
yeah.
Okay. I did my active duty in the military as an infantry intelligence officer. And
Okay.
then I went to the CIA where they're happy to have me working on Soviet foreign policy. The highlight of my career really was being head of the Soviet foreign policy branch in the early 70s, going to Moscow to see the conclusion of the Anti Ballistic Missile Treaty 1972, which we as analysts of Russia played a large role in enabling, not only in telling Kissinger and Nixon that the Russians are really interested in arms control, but also in telling Kissinger and Nixon that their policy of playing China off against Russia was working. Okay.
All
So
right.
I took great delight in that. 30 years, count them, 30 years of strategic stability until George W. Bush, in his own wisdom, annulled the treaty, got out of it, and that's where things started to go down really quickly
Yeah,
with respect to relations between Russia and China, between Russia and the United States.
yeah.
My expertise at first was Soviet foreign policy towards China, toward Vietnam, toward the Far East, and for the international communist movement. I learned a lot, and I learned not to be a old warrior. I learned to respect what interests lie on the Russian side. And right now, I am appalled at the level of expertise, if you can call it that, that
Mhm.
prevails in our government, where you have otherwise respected people saying, if Putin takes Ukraine, he's going to take Poland and the Baltic. Before you know it, he'll be on
Yeah,
the English Channel. I mean, that's
mhm.
Quatsch, that's bollocks, as the British say.
Yeah, yeah.
And what I'm doing is trying to breathe some sense into policymakers as well as American people,
Mm.
and I do that by speaking like this, by writing, and by responding to questions such as you will be offering to me.
That is something else. In Sweden and most of international media, uh, what you said, Putin will go further. Putin, we have a Swedish lieutenant colonel. His name is Paasikivi. He has roots in Finland, and his father fought in the winter wars against Russia, uh, where obviously is aware of. He is,
So he was fighting with the Nazis
yeah,
against Russia.
his father.
Okay,
Yeah,
follow you.
exactly. Yeah, they were fighting
Okay,
for Germany basically, but they were. It's called the Finnish Defense War. Uh,
right. Well,
so
let's
so
remember that which
uh,
side they were on in the
yeah,
beginning.
exactly. Then they were also fighting against the Nazis in the end because that's what happened. But this guy, he's on Swedish national television each day, every day, saying things like, if Putin wins the war, we're all lost. He's going to take Scandinavia. He's going to take Europe. He's going to go to the Europe all over. And he's led on Swedish media. And I mean, I watch CNN and MSNBC and all those light channels just to be informed. They're all that stupid. Media is a big crook in my eyes. They don't know nothing about nothing. Uh,
Let me
yeah,
let me comment on that before I lose my train of thought.
yeah,
The notion that the Russians will never stop.
hmm,
First, they're going to gobble up all of Ukraine. Not so, unless they're so stupid as the US was in Vietnam,
yeah,
Afghanistan, and Iraq, which they're not. Okay. First, they're going to gobble up all of Ukraine, and then it'll be Poland and the Baltic states and France.
mm,
You, before you know it, it'll be right opposite England. That's kvach. That's yerunda in Russian. I mean, that's crazy. All right.
yeah,
Why? Why can I say that with such confidence? Let me tell you, Mr. Bergmark.
yeah,
Uh, I could say that with great confidence because the Russians already stopped.
yeah,
Oh, what do you mean, McGovern? That the Russians already stopped? They stopped 6 weeks after the war started.
mm,
They scared the hell out of Zelensky. They said
yeah,
almost immediately, look, can't we do a deal? Can't we work stuff out so
yeah,
we don't have to kill our brother Slavs? And Zelensky, scared with troops near Kiev, says, okay, let's talk. They talked. Ukrainians and Russians in Belarus and then finally in Turkey. I'm talking March and early April 2002, once again, just weeks after the special military operation started. They
yeah,
got together. Now, what happened? They reached a deal. The whole Russian objective was that Ukraine not join NATO.
yeah,
The
exactly.
Ukrainian representative said, okay, our constitution says we should be neutral, and so we won't join NATO. Meanwhile, we just stopped, and the Russians stopped. They withdrew their troops from around Kiev
Yeah,
as a measure of goodwill.
yeah,
And they decided, well, the two of them would talk about Crimea, they talk about the Donbass later. But meanwhile, stop the war. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know this history, it's not me making it up. The the Ukrainian negotiators at the time now admit that they were all set. One of them,
mm,
Haramia, had initialed this thing, the chief negotiator, and he's not some sort of Ukrainian dissident. He's head of the Zelensky's party faction in the
yeah,
Ukrainian parliament, for God's sake. So it's all admitted in public now that the Russians agreed to stop, and that the Americans and their vassal state, the UK, the English, came in and said, "Oh, I better not do this, because if you do this, we won't support you with all these fancy weapons and all this
mm,
political support for as long as it takes." Okay, one little
yeah,
footnote here. Now, the United States doesn't say for as long as it takes. It says for as long as we can.
yeah,
And we can't anymore because Congress has come to its senses, and so far at least has said, no, we're not gonna throw 60 billion with a B,
mm,
billion more dollars after good money after bad here. We're not going to give any more support to Ukraine. Meanwhile, The Russians are slowly, they call it attrition, right? Attrition. They're slowly moving. And in a few weeks, my military advisors tell me that the Russians will be capable of moving all the way to the Dnieper River
Yeah.
and kind of divide Ukraine in half. I don't think, this is just a guess, I don't think Mr. Putin wants to do that. I think he
No,
wants to negotiate. And
I
I
think
see that
so.
in the last words of Sergei Lavrov, the Russian
Yeah.
foreign minister, he's virtually crying out for sensibility and saying, "Look, let's negotiate, but we can't negotiate with surrendering first," which is what Zelensky's formula happens to be.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think Putin. Okay, you mentioned the Dnieper River, which is basically running from through Kiev and down to the Black Sea. That could possibly be what the Russians will have to do, because then they will create a buffer zone, because they're right now being attacked into Belgorod and other Russian, not Ukrainian cities. So he wants them to stay away. And I don't, Putin himself has said, I have no interest in occupying Ukraine because I can't govern Ukraine. I can't do that because I don't want a territory that halfways is opposed to be Russian. The Donbass and the Luhansk and that area, they want to be Russian, just as Crimea. They had a vote about that. They want to belong to Russia. They're Russian ethnical people, and they want to belong to Russia. They don't want anything to do with the Ukrainian government at all. The people don't want it. But for Putin, it would be, in his own words, too difficult to govern the rest of the western parts of Ukraine. And Ukraine is a large area geographically. It's about the size of Texas, I've learned. And it's larger than my home country, Sweden, by a lot. You know, Scandinavia is a small area, but it's strategic. And that comes into my next question that my Danish friend told me to ask you. I mean, Sweden is now a new member of NATO, and it's been a long haul for it. The process has been cumbersome since Turkey first opposed it, and Hungary opposed Sweden to be. Finland got let in quite quickly. And now we're like an area that's strategic, it's called, around the Baltic Sea. And the Swedish government signed also the DCA agreement, which is Defense Cooperation Agreement, in Washington, saying that we will let U.S. troops, NATO troops, to 17 of our most strategic military installations to NATO. What's your take on that? Why do you think Sweden did this? 200 years of neutrality and no war. The government gave it up like that.
Well, my answer is a question.
Yeah.
Where is Olaf Palme when
Yeah.
we need him?
Yeah, he's
For
dead,
God's sake.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how did he die? That's another question.
Yeah.
Now,
And they still don't know, and that was 1986.
that's right. Well, some people know.
Yeah.
What I
Yeah.
want to just say is that it doesn't make any sense other than to say that the people ruling Europe right now are a bunch of political hacks,
Yeah.
including Sweden. I'm sorry to say. I mean, Washington included also, okay?
Yeah.
And they're governed mostly by filthy lucre. We call
Yeah.
it money, we call it dollars, okay? And people like Saab
Yeah.
seem to be ruling Sweden
Yeah.
and getting quite rich.
Oh, yeah.
Now, how how can the Swedes be persuaded to join NATO?
Yeah.
Well, you make up a story. You say that
Well,
Putin
the Swedish
wants to
people
take
were,
over.
Ray, the Swedish people were not asked about this. Normally, in a decision vital as giving up 200 years of free neutrality would be a vote, you know, but the Swedish people were never asked. The government just said, this is good for us. We've been bribed. The family that owns Saab that you mentioned is Wallenberg, and they control everything in Sweden. I mean, they control Ericsson, the telecom company. They control companies in the United States. They're part owner of Raytheon, of General Dynamics, of Boeing. They're huge. They're oligarchs, and they control the Swedish government because you go into NATO, you get this job here after your career is ended. It's a total uh, it's dictatorship that rules. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's there are lots of deleterious effects to all this. I remember, I'm a pretty old guy. I remember how Olof Palme
Yeah,
was able, because of Sweden's neutrality, to play a constructive role in world affairs, a very constructive role, not only in trying to tamp down that awful war in Vietnam,
yeah,
but in other ways as well. In other words, neutrality is not just a concept, it's a very, very useful situation to
yeah,
be in where you have credibility on both sides. Now, Sweden has zero credibility in Russia now.
yeah,
Why? Well, because Sweden is ruled by Bob and Washington,
yeah,
and nothing better can be expected of Sweden. So it's very, very sad to have to say these things, but the same is true almost as bad as Switzerland, for God's sake.
yeah,
Switzerland, the acme of, the prototype of neutrality.
yeah,
They're now sanctioning Russia because the U.S. tells them to. And it's just really what happened to Vernunft? What
yeah,
happened to sensibility here? Where are
yeah,
the Willy Brandts or the Egon Bahrs or even the Schröders or people who knew which end was up and
yeah,
saw that the Russians could be dealt with
yeah,
and dealt properly with them until George W. Bush came in and
yeah,
his successors, and things went down. Now, there
yeah,
is no amicable relationship between the US and Russia right now. It's a more dangerous situation, I dare say, in the light of 6 decades, count them, 6 decades of experience watching Russian leaders. It's a more delicate and dangerous situation right now than I've ever seen it in my professional lifetime.
yeah. The European media is full of stories.
I know the word you want to say.
Yeah, yeah.
Full of what?
I was very impressed when you said förnuft. That's common sense in the Swedish language. I salute you for knowing that förnuft. That's something that's missing, uh, mainly among politicians, but also media. But I want to switch to another thing. I don't know if you have any knowledge or any thoughts about this container ship from registered or owned by a Danish uh, ship company, Maersk, that crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge. We have looked at it, at all the video that's available, and me being a former naval officer, I feel that there's something strange about how this happened. We know about Ever Given in the Suez Canal a few years ago that blocked the world trade. Quite also very strange, but nothing has come out of it other than that it was some unfortunate accident. And in the media, it's an unfortunate accident with the crash in the bridge in Maryland. Do you have any information about that or any thoughts?
Lots of thoughts. Have they interrogated the captain? Have they
No.
talked to the crew? I mean, therein lies the information.
Yeah.
Was it a computer screw up? Why did it turn around and go into the bridge? My God, these questions cry out for being answered. And you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to say, unless they're asked and unless they're answered, people will have to speculate as to what went on.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I would just say that, Maersk, your shipping company, why your shipping company or the Danish? It's the Danes, isn't
They're
it?
Danish. They're a
Okay.
global company. They're
Yeah.
huge.
Right.
They're owned by a
But
family.
yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. They're owned by a family with the last name Ugla, and that controls Marx. They're one of the absolute biggest actors in international shipping. They own the largest ships. And they have their ownership in other big cargo companies. They're global, but they're based in Denmark.
Right.
All right. Yeah.
So there's a lot of money involved here. I'm remembering the war against Iraq, which was started on false pretenses.
Yeah.
We could prove that 2 months before the war in Iraq, there were no weapons of mass destruction there. Nobody listened to us. And I think the most flagrant example of toadyism, of cowardice, was exemplified by the Danish head of NATO at the time, Anders Fogh Rasmussen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what did he say the day before the attack on Iraq, the US UK attack on Iraq? He said, "It is not that we think there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We know there are WMD in Iraq." Now, why would he do that? Well,
Yeah.
in addition to currying favor with
Yeah.
Washington, there's Maersk.
Yeah.
Maersk made billions of dollars by shipping supplies for the Americans into Iraq and other helpful things. So Saab in Sweden, Maersk in Denmark.
Yeah.
Where are the people who are honest and say, "Look, you're talking about killing people. We're not going to be a part of this." Did they all die with Olaf Palme? I hope
No.
not.
No, they did not. I myself personally, I grew up during Olof Palme's prime ministry in Sweden, and I didn't agree with him a lot. But growing older and seeing what he actually did, I think it was kind of a strong, good leader of this country. But now people are going to call me communist, but for Olof Palme, but Olof Palme had a backside, and he wanted the state to control everything in Sweden. He actually opposed in 1983, 3 years before his murder. He opposed a suggestion from the what do you call them, the unions, so socialize everything. He opposed that because he said we need Volvo to be private, we need Saab to be private, we need the industry. So he did a few good things, but he had another side in the Social Democrat Party that was actually destructive, and they still operate today. Unfortunately for Sweden, it's a semi socialist country. 53% of Sweden's gross national product is from the public sector, and that's not very good.
Mhm.
So
Let me just ask, what percentage of Swedish people live in abject poverty?
uh, about half, I would say. It depends on how you measure it. Swedish people have it generally quite safe and okay, but on a very low level of income, very low level. When I worked in the United States and I told my parents in Sweden what I was making, they go, "You're a billionaire?" No, I'm not. I'm just running a company in the United States. I had a video company. We sold video cassettes. It's quite a simple thing, but I made like $5,000, $6,000 a month for myself, and that is triple what my parents were making as teachers. You know, but they're it's semi-socialist in Sweden, and people have it okay. We have a safety grid for everybody. You can go to the welfare agency if your money is not enough for your rent or whatever, and you get it.
Yeah. See,
No,
the reason I ask that is
yeah,
this is not the situation in the United States. We have more people living in poverty
yeah,
than any time in recent memory. And that is because the people who are in charge of the United States are very much influenced by the Raytheons and the Lockheeds and the people
yeah.
who are profiteering on war. So you can call it socialism if you will, and
Mhm.
perhaps that's the right word for it. But my concern is, well, the biblical mandate to take care of the widow, the
Yeah.
orphan, the refugee, and we're not doing that in the United States, and that troubles me deeply.
Yeah, well, what we see here, if you search for it, if you look at mainstream media and want to know what's going on in the US, my two wonderful daughters live in Texas right now. So I have their information, but they're not politically interested, but they live their lives. My oldest daughter is quite successful. She's a wedding planner, and
Wow.
she has clients all over the world and does it very well. She's entrepreneurial. So last time I met her this Christmas, she was on her way to Italy to do some mafia boss wedding. But she makes money on that, so I have nothing to say about that. She's cool. Jennifer, she's my oldest. She's born 83. So she's an old girl right now. But that thereby I get a little bit more information than I can gather from the media, because from the media I can't get any correct information. Of course, I watch Redacted and I watch Tucker Carlson. I watch you and other people, uh, but it's hard to get an understanding if you're not in the United States and see it for yourself. But what I understand, the United States is not getting better. It's in decay. I've seen pictures from Philadelphia, from Portland, Oregon, about the drug abuse and the homeless and all that. And you're in New York, I guess.
No, I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Uh-huh, okay. But you were born in New York City, right? Bronx?
That's correct. Mhm.
Okay. So in Raleigh, North Carolina. How are things actually there, in your opinion?
Well, there is a lot of poverty in North Carolina, and there's a lot of denial going on where our legislature does its best to keep people in poverty and applaud when money is given to the arms trade. Let me
Yeah.
just say this that uh, the situation in the United States is as follows. We are, in many respects, the wealthiest country in the world. We are protected by two very large oceans so far, okay?
Yeah.
And we have money galore that could be given to fixing our social problems, but instead are given to war. We call it the defense industries, but
Yeah.
they're the offense industry. So, in terms of social matters, if you compare the benign sort of socialism that exists in Scandinavia with the kind of capitalism that puts so much money, more than half of our discretionary taxes go to the military, then the comparison speaks for itself. And again, I would say that my priority is the biblical mandate of taking care of the widow, the orphan, and the refugee who need not be in that status because there's enough money to go around.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what's going on in Sweden because we do have here. Sweden is also not a poor country in any way. We have still very viable industries and we have good incomes. Everything is kind of cool, but um, there is a hole in it, and the thing is, Sweden recently sent to Ukraine 30 billion uh, kroners, $3 billion to Ukraine weapons. We spend $53 billion. I shouldn't say dollars. $5.3 billion in support to various countries in Africa, in the Middle East, and other places. Sweden just loads money outside. We pay a lot of money to the European Union. We're the givers, and the takers are the pigs countries: Portugal, Italy, Spain, and pigs, Greece. Uh, and they don't take care of our own at all. Like you said, take care of the widow. No, no, no. It's better to send some money to fight a war in a far off country. So the politics are, for me, horrific. And the government in Sweden right now is a coalition that I don't know what they're doing. They're not doing anything really. They're looking at shit that nobody cares about, like turning the clock 1 hour today, which screwed up my whole schedule for the day. Why are we turning our clocks to daylight savings time? Why?
Well, because Washington told you to.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty simple.
Yeah, yeah,
So
that's yeah,
we've gone from the sublime to the ridiculous. I think
yeah,
let's go back to foreign affairs where I know something
yeah,
that I can draw from in terms of
exactly.
my experience.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I thought maybe you would ask me about what's going on in Ukraine on the ground, and you
Yeah,
pretty
yeah,
much
yeah,
did
yeah, yeah,
before.
yeah. Well,
But the
I listened to Patrick Lancaster. I listened to Scott Ritter and others. So I get some information, of course, but I don't know exactly what to believe. I look a lot at India Today, Hindustan Times.
That's good. Hmm.
Yeah, they're good. To me, it seems like they're truthful. When you look
Hmm.
at MSNBC or CNN or Swedish or Deutsche Welle or whatever, it's not truthful.
Yeah. Well, they're all controlled, and maybe I could go back to a little bit of American history that I know about that I was
Yeah,
alive during. When General Eisenhower of World War II fame, left the presidency, he said, look, I'm really worried about one thing and one thing above all other things. This was in his valedictory, his farewell address, okay? And he said, there's something called the military industrial complex, which has grown since the war and has not stopped growing. Mm. And if it gets disproportionate influence and power, our democracy is at risk. Now, whether they want this power or they don't want it, pretty clear they want it, okay? Yeah. This is a danger. And the only thing that can prevent this, get this now, the only thing that can prevent it is a well-informed citizenry, okay? Yeah. Okay, now, let's fast forward. That was 1961. Yeah. So what are we? Yeah. Long time now. So do we have a well-informed citizenry? You answered that before. We do not. What do we have? We used to call it the military-industrial complex, the MIC, right? Mm. Right now, I've coined a new expression, which is in the dictionary now. Perhaps you've heard it. I call it the Mickey Mat. Okay. Okay. It sort of rhymes a little bit with Mickey Mouse. Okay. Here it is. If you got a pencil for your viewers here, it's the Military Industrial Congressional Intelligence Media Academia Think Tank Complex. Okay. Well, why do I say media as if in all capital letters? Yeah. Because media is the linchpin. It's just as Eisenhower predicted. If you don't have a free media and you don't have a well-educated population, the MIC is going to take care over your government and take over your very lives. And that's really what's happened here. So it's the Mickey Mat again, military, industrial, congressional. Now, Ike wanted to say congressional, but that was crossed out of his speech. We know why. I won't go into that. Okay. Military, industrial, congressional intelligence. We call that the deep state in this country. Yeah. They're the same. Oh, wait a second now. Oh, Swedish. Aren't you guys involved in the deep state? Well, yeah, you are. We know that your Swedish police in Stockholm participated in one of the worst episodes of denial of freedom of press in the world's history, when they made up a story about Julian Assange committing rape in Stockholm. That's just a question. It was in Sweden, was it? Did he do rape? No. I agree. What happened?
The thing with Assange was that they hired two blonde hookers. The state did. Go and fuck with him on the hotel room, and then you say that you were raped. So he had to flee. That's what happened. Then he had to flee, and he flew to the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he, stayed for a few years. But then they extradited him from that and put him in the Belmarsh prison under horrible circumstances. So,
let me interject here. Julian Assange is a friend of mine.
Okay.
I used to visit him in the Ecuadorian embassy.
Yeah, in London.
He is a very, very courageous person.
Yeah.
Just to start at the end here, he has just been offered 3 months ago a deal.
Yeah.
All he has to do is plead guilty to one count of espionage, and he walks out of Belmarsh prison, a free man, goes to Australia to rehabilitate himself.
Yeah.
What did Julian Assange say? No way will I make it possible for the United States to use one of its laws to convict anyone abroad or anyone anywhere of espionage. No deal. That's a matter of principle. Now, did Julian Assange have intercourse with two women in Sweden? Yes, he did.
Hmm.
Uh, did they want him prosecuted for rape? No, they didn't. It was the Swedish police that falsified those records. How do I
Yeah.
know that? I know that because the UN rapporteur for torture, Niels Melzer, okay, he looked into Assange's case and he said, "This smells to high heaven. I'm going to go to Stockholm and look at the original police records." Now, the Swedish apparently were not smart enough to know that Niels Melzer was fluent in Swedish.
Okay. Yeah.
So he read the police records and he found out the real story. You want to know the real story?
Yes,
Okay.
I do.
He had intercourse with these two women. One of the condoms broke, and one
Yeah.
of them said, "Oh my God, maybe he has HIV. And
Hmm.
we ought to let's see if we can get him tested." Now this is the Bible. This is what Meltzer reported from his
Yeah.
extensive research in the original Swedish Stockholm police records. What he said was, "Okay." Assange says, "Well, I was just tested recently for HIV. It was negative. There's no reason for to do that." And women, you could understand this. Women in those days, HIV was really big. And they said, "Well, so how do we persuade Julian to get tested again?" And then they made the fatal mistake by going to the Swedish police, who, as everyone knows, are in very close contact with what are now the American allies,
Yeah.
which then were simply sister security services. Okay. And they said, "Look, these women, two of them, they knew each other. And it's clear in their email exchange that Meltzer read. They said, is there any way, uh, police, is there any way that we could insist that Julian get tested?"
Yeah.
And the Swedish police said, "Leave it to us." Next morning, Julian Assange raped two Swedish women.
Yeah.
Headlines in the Swedish press. Okay. That's
Exactly.
what started the whole thing. Okay.
Yeah.
The women, they were distraught. They didn't want this. And that's reflected in these emails. Now, I think Sweden really needs to hang its head in shame for being responsible for the U.S. getting a hold of Assange and making an example of him so that now everyone, every reporter in the world, whether they were in Sweden or in Antarctica or Brazil or China, has to fear if they print a true story about U.S. crimes, they'll be gotten. You get them. The CIA is all over the place. And if they end up in Sweden, well, the sister service there will cooperate completely. Okay. So that's what's at stake here, freedom of the press. And
Yeah.
Sweden played an, an awful role in all this and
Uh,
enabling Julian Assange to be considered a rapist. If you ask people in the United States today about Julian Assange, the normal man on the street, woman on the street will say, "Oh, that's the guy who raped those two Swedish women, right?"
yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that's how powerful this propaganda organ is. And
Yeah.
getting back to Eisenhower, he was right on the money in saying, unless there's a well-informed citizenry, which we don't have, I doubt whether Sweden has, then the
No.
military industrial complex is going to enrich itself at the expense of
Mm.
peace as well as the expense of normal people like us.
Yep. We have to be careful, both you and I, to meet the faith of Julian Assange. I really appreciate your knowledge about that case. I mean, I've thought all along that what he did with WikiLeaks was a service to people to actually expose a lot of the shit that goes on. But, on YouTube, you got to be careful. We couldn't talk about the COVID thing. We couldn't talk about the injections. You'd get shut down immediately. And the government knows and the government can. So, yeah,
let me let me
yeah,
Let me interject a specific here. It's
Yep.
fine for me to talk in historical terms, even though it's only 10 years ago. But more recently, we have this war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, we know that on the 1st of February, 2008, the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov,
Yeah.
same foreign minister as now, he just had come into office, he called the U.S. ambassador in. His name was William Burns.
Yeah.
He happens to be head of the CIA right now.
Oh, Bill
He said,
Burns.
yeah, Ambassador Burns, do you know what "niet" means? Burns said, yeah, I think I. Well, listen, "niet" means "niet." We have a red line, and the red line says no Ukraine in NATO. Do you understand that, Mr. Burns? Yes, I do. So, if you let Ukraine in NATO, there will be a civil war in Ukraine. We know that that will happen. And we will have to decide whether or not to intervene. So please tell your people, "niet" means "niet," Mr. Burns. So what did Burns do? He reported back to Washington in a cable from Embassy Moscow. And if I've seen one such cable, I've seen thousands of them in my career as chief of the Soviet Foreign Policy Branch. Okay. He reported back and he played it straight. He said, "Niet" means "niet," Russia's red line on admission of Ukraine and Georgia to NATO. That was the 1st of February, 2008.
Yeah.
2 months later, April 3rd, 2008, NATO, under pressure from George W. Bush and Cheney, said Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO. They said that in the final declaration. That's as official as you can get. So that happened in 2008, February 1st, April 3rd. Now, why do I mention that? Well, isn't that interesting? Isn't that essential information to know that the Russians warned about this? Well, yes, it is. How do we know that? Did somebody make that up? You probably know the answer to this. It was a WikiLeaks revelation.
Yeah.
The cable from Moscow was made available by WikiLeaks. And so now we can shed a light on how Bill Burns, William Burns, ambassador to Russia in 2008, what does he say now about Russia going into Ukraine? What does he say? He says, it was totally unprovoked.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
totally unprovoked. So we have
Yeah.
our intelligence services now, which is the cardinal sin of my profession, forming the intelligence judgments to coincide with the policy. Burns knows darn well that Russia was provoked, okay?
Yeah.
And,
Exactly.
right till this very day, you could see that Russia was provoked. Russia went in with a less than 100,000 men into Ukraine. They wanted to scare the hell out of Zelensky, as I said before. They did. There were negotiations. They reached an agreement where Ukraine would not become a member of NATO, and there would be a ceasefire. Crimea, Donbass would be dealt with later, and the U.S. and Britain put the kibosh. It means annul that by telling Zelensky, no. If you do that, then we won't support you for as long as it takes. Unfortunately, Zelensky is a terrific actor, but he really doesn't know what's best for his country, and he doesn't really seem to care.
No. Somebody ironically named him the best paid actor in the world, talking about Zelensky. All right. Mr. McGovern, a pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on. We've been on for about an hour, and that I think is about enough. if you don't have anything more to add to this conversation, I thank you so much for coming on, and I hope we can do it in one more time in the future.
Well, I have something to add.
Okay. Go ahead.
I have to confess that my country, supported by the likes of Sweden, is enabling genocide in Gaza.
Yeah.
People are being killed. 90 children under the age of 5 killed every night. Now, I was alive during a genocide in Germany. I never thought that my country and its satraps and its vassals would approve of a genocide, no matter by whom, by Israel or anyone else. But that's what's going on now. So I would like to make a little appeal here that we need some hope that this will change. It's Easter Sunday here in the United States. I happen to believe that there is hope. Augustine, I think, said that hope has 2 daughters, anger and courage. Okay. Well, I think that's true. I think that those of us who are not angry at the United States' role in enabling torture and in enabling genocide in Gaza, and that's what it is, folks. That's what the Israelis intend to do, to finish off the Palestinian people. But we have to have the courage to speak out. And lastly, I have been educated in a theological way also. I have a degree in theology. And I would just say that I believe it is true that there are 3 things that last: faith, hope, and love. And that it's a stretch. Okay, it's a stretch. But the person who I don't believe there was a big stone in the tomb, and I don't believe that there was necessarily an empty tomb. I believe that I see this person alive and people spreading the truth, like you, Mr. Bergman, like the rest of us who want to get to justice and who want to stop unnecessary killing. And so it's a big stretch to love your enemy. But I think we need to proceed in love and have the courage to do the kinds of things that the virtue of anger would require us to do. And I couldn't let this conversation end without saying this that I feel so strongly about. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Amen. Thank you so much, Mr. McGovern. And I hope we can do this again. So I'll go offline right now with a huge thanks to you for all your insights. And
You're most welcome.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Bye.